Okay, good afternoon, Clem. Huge pleasure to be here with you. Huge pleasure to meet you recently. I feel there are many things in terms of the energy that we put in life and the way we do things because we believe something may be happening. So it was very inspiring to have you coming over. The idea now is to talk a little bit about your work, your career with CRL, specifically about the gaming industry. So let's start with a simple question: what inspired you to found CRL in the 80s, and what were the primary goals for the company at that time? Because you were very young, if I remember well.
Well, I was 19, 8. I was so young, I can't remember how young I was. I was either, maybe even 17, but let's say 18, 19. And the goal was I was running out of money. Okay. So I'd got a bit of money to start a business, and the first two had utterly failed. And I was down to like a couple of £1,000, which in these days, call it £10,000. And I thought, why don't I just take an advert out in a computer magazine and say, have you written a game? If you have, send it to me and I'll have a look at it. I might publish it. So I did that in Popular Computing Weekly, which is this weekly magazine, which was ambitious, a weekly magazine on computer games, or computers anyway. And I literally got a post bag full of games. Whoa. And some of them were really, really good. And the first games that I published were from that post bag. And it was just on the tilt between ZX81 and Spectrum. In fact, the first products were mainly ZX81s. Okay. And then I got the Spectrum in the post at the office and had a Spectrum, tested the games that were sent for the Spectrum, and some of them were pretty good. So published them. There was hardly any games out at the time. So there was a demand for games, not many publishing going on. And, I rang up the big retailers like WH Smith's and Boots, who were like Corte Inglese in Spain. And they went, yeah, we'll have some.
But what were you doing before that? Because you told me you had some money to start a business, but you were running out of that money, and you had no experience publishing anything for the computing area.
I left school,
okay,
and I went to sign up for university, and I hadn't got the grades because being a little bit dyslexic, I kind of couldn't give them the answers they wanted. I gave them the answers, but not the ones they wanted, and I came from a background that didn't really understand that you can just ring them up and say, "Can I come? I know I didn't get the grades, but can you let me in?" I applied for industrial archaeology, and they were so desperate to get me. They said 2 Ds at A level, which is like 0, and we'll let you in. And I didn't get 2 Ds, I got 2 Es, which was like next to complete failure. And I didn't realize if I'd rung them up and said, "Please, can I come and dig up some steam engines?" They would say, "Yeah, please, no one else wants to do that." But I didn't know that. So I was straight out of school and then went straight into business equivalent.
And into this business specifically, it was the first business.
Well, I had a fistful of money because my father said, "Here's £10,000, go start a business or fail miserably. Just here you are, here's your go. You're not going to do anything else. Start a business." So I tried and it was rubbish. I tried and it was rubbish. I tried and it was CRL. And I was down to my last cup of money.
Normally it's like that. The good stories are like those.
Yeah. And I got the cheapest office in the whole of London. It was £2,250 a year. And it was over the top of a tailor shop just down the road from the mother of 2 of Britain's most infamous criminals that were in jail at the time for murder. And it was Whitechapel, where Jack the Ripper was just up the road, and a pub where someone had been shot dead at the bar was just up the road. And I was in this tailor shop over the top of it, and the back of the building had been blown off in the war. So you could open a door and fall 30 foot onto the car park below. And the floor above me had no windows in it, and birds were living in it. And so it was the cheapest property you could get.
But that didn't affect the quality of the games and the things you did afterwards.
Fortunately, yes.
So what were the? So you started like that, which is already mind blowing. What were some of the challenges faced in the beginning of CRL, and how did you overcome that? Because you were starting from scratch.
I wouldn't say I really overcame anything as such. I mean, the way that I look at it now, so I'm now 60, so this is almost 2 generations ago, and the way that I still see it today is you work out what you've going to do. And then you work out how. You don't go, well, what I want to do is this, but I can't. It's impossible. You go, I want to do this. How am I going to do it? And then you think and you think and you think and you think and you try and you think and you just keep trying to find ways of doing it. So the classic business person's way is to go to somebody and say, can I have some money, please? Please give me some money. I want to do this. So that's the basic thing that entrepreneurs do, is they raise money. But that's only part of the picture of basically having something you really want to do and then working out how you can do it, or at least nearly do it, or get close to doing it, or get some way towards doing it. And if you do that, you'll be amazed at how you'll be able to do it. And we all meet people that say, I've got this great idea, I'm going to make a balloon and I'm going to fly to Iceland in my balloon. And then you go, okay, when are you going to do that then? And they go, well, there's all this...
One day.
One day, all these things in the way, and I'm going to start next week. And it's an idea that never goes into action.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have a little idea and you start to put it into action, you can get anywhere. It's like this place. I mean, you've turned a idea, which to me is just amazing. I mean, what? And you turned it into a museum. And it's a manifestation of your imagination, which was immediately put into practice. Yeah. You found a place to put it. You had built a collection, and then you thought, I've got a collection. So it's like throughout my life, I've got interested in things, and then I've immediately turned them into physical things. Okay. So if you're into a certain field, you then make a YouTube channel around it. Yep. Or you, if you're into chess, you start building chessboards. There's an automatic drive in certain people to take their inner life and externalize it. Yep. And so I suppose I kind of always had that externalization. And CRL was the first externalization that actually got traction. Yeah. And 40 years later, it still has it, which is incredible to me.
Yeah. And probably it's very hard for you to look at challenges because you don't see them as challenge. You see them as things that need to be done, and somehow you found ways to...
Yeah, you don't, they're not challenges. As you say, they're things that have to be done. And bad things happen if you can't do them. Yeah. And if you can't do them today, you try to do them tomorrow. And really, it's all... there was a TV... series when I was very, very young, almost this sort of age, and there was a business person that was basically going bust all the way through the show, and in the end he's running away from his creditors. He jumps off a bridge and ends on top of a bus holding onto the bus as the bus drives off, and his creditors run down the street and they get on the bus, and that's the end of the show as the bus is driving off with him on the roof, with them getting into the bus and buying a ticket. And so that idea of, you just can never give up, you can never give in, you have to keep going, is something that's very useful in these sort of situations.
Focusing on some of the games, CRL published some innovative and groundbreaking video games. What was your approach to identify and select projects to publish? Was there any criteria? Was it whatever you believe could be sold?
You see, the thing is, these days, if you were in the game, you would have, bankers, you'd be publicly listed, you'd have millions of pounds to do it, and you'd have hundreds of millions of pounds if you're in America. I've heard of a computer game startup in America that was given $1,000 million to start.
Just to start, yeah.
And I had $2,000. That was all I had left to start. And that's a different world. And, I could not afford not to publish software.
Yeah.
And you were just always trying to make payroll at the end of the day. And your staff, who were actually all children, I was just out of being a child, but the people I hired were literally had left school at 16 to work for me, and they were children. And to make payroll with no capital, you had to publish games, and then you had to get paid by those people that bought them off you. And they didn't like paying you.
Yeah,
it really was difficult to get paid. So there was always a constant, overwhelming financial pressure for you to stay in the business. So when a game came in and you looked at it and you went, I can sell that, you'd sell it. Or I would sell it anyway. And a lot of people who got choosy about what they published, they'd go bust very quick.
Okay.
Right? Because it's like this. How could you have possibly predicted that one of my more successful games, not the most successful, one of my more successful games would have a following of hundreds of fanatical people all over Europe 40 years after it was published?
Yeah.
You can't
anticipate that.
You can't. Yeah. You can in some ways participate. I'm sorry. You can guess what is going to be successful, because it would have a license, for example, or it would be an amazing game, for example. But even then, it was very difficult to know what was going to work and what wasn't going to work, and you just had to follow your gut on it. And one of the things that happened is when people sent you games, you could almost tell from the letter whether it was going to be a good game. Because if you opened the letter and it said, dear CRL, here's my game. It's about lorries. Regards, Pete Cook. I'd look at that and I'd go, this is going to be a good game. And it was juggernaut. And I was told by one of your people, your historians, that it was the first lorry game ever published.
Okay.
But I knew as soon as I saw it, it had this kind of raster scan lorry that you drove around. It was very good. I just knew from the letter it was going to be like that. And then you get another letter which says, dear CRL, paragraph, page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4. You could guarantee it was going to be poor.
Yeah.
So it was like, I could almost tell from the letters. A number of times I opened the letter and I went, that's going to be good, just from the letter. So that was kind of strange.
Okay. Was there any particular game that, in terms of the first impression, somehow got you more excited about? You thought it was really going to be a success or not? Anyone in particular that you remember?
Well, there's a few. And the whole period was a period of you would be doing your games and someone would come out with something and you would go, oh, holy cow. Oh, look at that. I give up. But you wouldn't. But you go, well, that can't be real. I mean, the one that strikes me the most was Knight's Law.
Knight's Law.
And that was a game that just was 10x better than anything that went before it. I mean, there would have been Ant-Attack, which was another one of kind of those games.
The isometric games.
Yeah. But you looked at it and you went, wow, that's incredible. But Knight's Law was just off the dial, brilliant. And you would occasionally have those sort of games come through to you when you knew it was like another generation up. And we had a few. Tau City was one. Academy was another. Rocky Horror Show in its own way was one. We had one which everybody loved that we didn't sell any of, called Cyberknights, which was by a writer called R.T. Smith. And we also published CCS games, which was my first corporate acquisition. And they had absolutely dedicated following of wargamers, and we were the wargamer brand. And it was an eye-opener to me that when I started a little shop, we would just sell mountains of this game, but we could not get the distribution channel to take the games and sell them in quantities. But wherever people were in the store, knew they were good games, would put them up, they would sell a lot. So it showed there was a major problem with the actual business model. And it's really the business model of Spectrum games and Amstrad games and anything tape-based, anything disc-based. It was fundamentally flawed because, basically our work was stolen. We would sell 2,000 copies and they would all go to the pirates. There were 2,000 pirates, they would buy 2,000 games. And then the games would proliferate out. So in the internet world, there's this idea, and the mobile phone game world, of the freemium model.
Yeah.
So you have a free game, and at a certain stage, you've got to pay for it. Or it's a free thing, but there's other functions that you'd quite like, you've got to pay for. Or you've got to buy mushrooms to feed your cows to get eggs to make cream in your Farmville style game. But the whole of the first generation of computer games, or you could say second, because the first was Atari, and they were cartridges. The generation that the Spectrum was in had no EOM. It had the free, but it didn't have MEOM on the end. There was no way that you could actually make the people that got your game for free pay for anything.
Pay for it.
Yeah. And they'd all tell you, oh, well, you know, if I really like the game, I buy it. No, not really.
Only 40 years later, now some collectors, but are a niche, probably do it.
It's interesting because of the free part, which is the whole point of freemium. Yep. You would get it out there and you would get this sort of momentum going that you would then make money from. We had the free part of it,
but not the
but the free
money.
part means that I'm sat here 40 years later.
Yeah.
Because in Portugal, I can tell you, I sold 0 Formula One.
You and everyone.
Yeah, me and everyone.
You and everyone in any game.
but now it's a legend.
Yeah.
And it's a legend because it was free.
The only problem is that you needed to eat during these 40 years.
Well, I mean, I found a way.
Okay.
I found a way to do that. But the actual free element of it means that I'm sat here 40 years later, allegedly being part of this legend. And so in a funny way, it had a dividend.
Yes.
But it was the aspect of it being, you know, almost automatically public domain by accident. That means that 40 years later, I'm sat here. So it's kind of amusing that the power of free is such a powerful thing that 40 years later, I can be sat here talking to you about it, which is, you know, incredible in my book.
Very nice, very nice. I would say then.
So thank you, pirates.
Now, I asked you about any first impression games that surprised you, and you said, okay, the ones that are an increase in terms of what was being done, and Night Lore was a game you referred. Now, any particular project that you believed a lot that CRL published, but it didn't turn out as you expected? Was there anyone where you had a personal expectation that didn't come?
Well, see, in the real world, you win awards and you're lauded quite often because you spend a lot of money on advertising.
Yep.
So, you know, you want to have a successful movie, you better have a lot of advertising. Now, if it's a great movie, no advertising, it becomes a cult, and you know, you get one of this sort of things happen. If you spend a lot of money and you've got a rubbish thing, people still remember it. If you spend a lot of money, you've got a great thing, it gets to be a classic, you know, it gets to be a Titanic or a Star Wars. And so, you know, we never had that sort of money to spend on marketing. And a lot of people that did spend that sort of money on marketing spontaneously went bust. Yep. So they'd come out with their 4 games, they'd spend oodles of money, and 6 months they'd be gone. You literally every week read about a software house that had been around for 4 months that had gone bust. And it was a litany of companies spending a lot of money and going bust. But of course, they would have the back page of a magazine and they'd have a double-page spread and an award review. But because we didn't do that, we didn't really win any. I mean, Formula One won no awards.
Yep.
I think it got 3 out of 5.
I think it's a cult game. It's really one of those games that has this dedicated fans.
It was a great game, but if we bought center page spreads and we bought the back page and we bought, you know, a page every month for a year with them, we would have got awards. Yep. Yeah, but because we didn't have the money, or we didn't plan to go bust.
Oh, it was not your strategy, so
they would go, well, you know, them, nah. You know, what about those guys that play? Oh, give that this month's pick of the week. And so a lot of our stuff our successful stuff was slow burn. Yeah. And of course, you didn't get much slow burn before it was out there in the market, and everybody had one in the schoolroom and were taping it. So that was limiting, but it did mean that you survived a long time. So we survived a very long time, and where all these people that had titles that you might have heard of better went bust almost immediately. So it was always a bit disappointing because we never had the sort of push that would get you on the front page because we never had the advertising, so we never got the support from the magazines, etc. We was always a little bit in the background. We were like the Hammer House of horror films rather than the Warner Brothers. And of course, in the long run, I'm sat here.
Yeah.
And so, hey,
it turned out okay in the sense that it allowed you not to go bust for.
The old phrase is, if you stand on the bridge long enough, you see all your enemies washed by below, and you know that seems to be something that's happened.
Yeah, very well. You know what I was thinking, and this is now a more personal comment. I was thinking that I've been having the opportunity to meet lots of people that was involved in this, and in terms of publishers, you're the first one. I've exchanged some emails with Ian Stewart from Gremlin. You're the first one running a company, a publishing house company. But I was thinking precisely on the opposite of what you were saying. And it's funny to see how different people apply different strategies and they turn out okay. Mav Dink, that was here, the guy from Last Ninja 2 and the First Samurai for the Amiga. Prodigy, yeah. So Mav Dink had a totally different strategy in the sense that he was... He was able to always get lots and lots and lots of media attention, supposedly by being kind and humble and all of that. And you would get much more than what normally people would pay for when they would pay for that. So it's funny to see different strategies being applied, and that's how the world goes, of course.
Well, the key of the whole industry was to have distribution.
Yeah.
And if you're a publisher, all the retail, well, the kids wanted it. They didn't have the money to pay for it, so they would be waiting to get their pirate copy. The retailers would know that it had a very short life because obviously the kids were going to be pirating it soon after. The wholesalers knew that you'd been working on it for 6 months and your whole business depended on it. So you were like those baby turtles that are hatching and heading for the sea. You had to get across the beach and everybody was preying on you on the way. Okay. So that was why it's so difficult to be a publisher, because everybody knew they had a short window for sales. Yep. And therefore, when you released it, you know, they could say, well, you know, how about I buy a few more for a little less? You know, you were in a very weak negotiating position. Yeah. When Sega and Nintendo came out with a cartridge that nobody could copy, they really stuck it to the distributors and to the retailers. Yeah, you're not going to get... We were giving away 60% discounts, 55% discounts. Okay. So a $7.95 game would come down to £2.45, that sort of thing. And... you know, so we were losing over half of the retail price. When the cartridges came out, they were getting like 22% discounts, 18% discounts. It's like the sort
very
of...
small.
Compared. Very, very, very small. And it was like, whoa.
And the cost of the cartridge probably was higher, no?
Well, I mean, the cost of the cartridge in Japan was nothing, right? Yeah. But they marked it up a hell of a long way to the publishers. So their business model was totally turned around. And of course, the kids couldn't copy them, so they had to buy them. And they couldn't buy them at £7.95 anymore. It was £30. Yep. So not only did they get £30 minus 20, and the price 25 quid, it cost them £5 maybe. So they was making £20 a game. Yep. Whereas we were making maybe £1.50. So the actual economics exploded with the cartridge because of the protection. And then along came the PS and the PlayStations, which had the same mechanic until they started chipping them. Yep. And when they started chipping them, that started to erode the whole scene. So they had to come out with a next level PlayStation. And then, of course, now it's online. It's the same. You can't copy an online game because your character is on some server and you have got no access to it. Yep. So the revolution that makes computer games now the biggest industry in media industry in the world is the fact that you can't copy it. Yep. And we were there when we were absolutely vulnerable to that.
So that raises me a question that I did not prepare, but I think it makes sense. So being a publisher, being so concerned with the coping of the games because it meant less money coming in and probably going bust sooner, was there any attempt to invest or challenge your developers to the ones that were submitting games, to come up with some of those crazy anti-protection mechanisms that none worked very well, but was there anything
there was a very good one, which was a lens.
The lens lock.
Lens lock. Yeah. And the whole industry lost its mind over that. Oh, the kids went, oh, no. The piracy isn't a thing. No, it doesn't work. What they meant is they couldn't copy it anywhere near as easily. But if that had have come out and everyone had adopted it, they would have just hacked it out.
Find a way to hack it. As always.
That's... And it would give you an extra 3 days for you to sell it on. So it wasn't a solution. The hardware was the solution. And then it was the client-server architecture that was the solution. And that, was a huge difference. I mean, the same thing, if you look at music, I mean, the music industry kept nearly dying because of copying. Yep. And now it's streaming. Music is just basically like water out of a tap. And, it's now no longer the foremost media because it's been undermined by being commoditized, by being like ambient. Music's just everywhere now.
Yeah, it is.
And in comparison with it being the driving media of its generation, or 3 generations, probably all the way up to about 1980, it's now drifted into the background because it doesn't have a lock-in that you have with computer games now. I mean, one of the interesting things was back in the day was when the mobile phone came out. When the mobile phone came out was when the torn gene came in, because everybody got a mobile phone, and that month they got a £300 phone bill. They couldn't afford to live and have a mobile phone, so they stopped buying clothes, and all the clothes manufacturers almost went out of business. All the retailers have closed, and all of a sudden everybody's wearing torn and worn jeans because actually that's the only one they got. And therefore it became fashionable because no one could afford a new pair of jeans.
Priorities.
Yeah, priorities, exactly. And you couldn't pirate a blooming mobile phone bill. That was it. You either paid for it or you had no phone.
In the case of mobile phone, then the success is also related to more than what you can do with it, is also the status. The idea of the perception of value that it brings.
Well, I think it was just purely the fact people got addicted to SMSs.
Yeah.
And, they had to keep contact with because this is, when you think about when the mobile phone wiped out the finances of a whole generation, that wasn't a smartphone. Yeah. That was a
normal
Nokia
kind of thing. Yeah. Okay, very well. So, of course, we could spend hours here.
I thought we were going to. I mean, I've laid in 3 hours.
No, I have a party to attend. We do have also some questions that are very specific from the Portuguese audience. But before that, so I think I'm starting to understand how the business was. So what happened to CRL, and so when did it shut down? When you moved to another thing? And
well, I mean, we had a few business accidents, and then basically it closed down, and then
in the 90s, 91.
It's a long time ago. I can't even remember the exact dates. Right. But what happened was I started a new company, and we bought up all the IP of the old company, and then that company went into multiplayer games, which I'd been doing. So it then really was focused on massively multiplayer games, and then it became an internet company, and then it built a financial website, and so I morphed with the years, and so it kind of it morphed. And from the early 90s, it was a different company that then became an internet company, and then.
And what made you go away was basically because the business was no longer there, right? So
I was so happy to leave the computer game industry. I can't describe it. In fact, it's almost like extracting myself from quicksand, because it wasn't really into the late 90s or even the early 2000s that I actually got clear of the computer game business, because it was always such a difficult business. I was going to say vicious, but it was also vicious, because you had this problem with the whole distribution channel. The economics of it were very difficult. And then when the Nintendos and Segas and Sonys came in, they basically squeezed you with their manufacturing costs. So as a development studio, you then had to get in with a publisher that could afford to put out $1 million on a new game. Yep. Just to manufacture it. And then people like Nintendo and Sega had a bit of a stranglehold on the publishers, because they made all the money, right? So that it became a different game, which is why I went into multiplayer games, because then you had a direct relationship with the customer.
Okay.
Yeah, so he paid you for your game. It was direct. There was no middleman. They either liked your stuff or they didn't. You weren't buying advertising. You weren't doing any of that stuff. You had your product. You charged them £9 a month to play the game or whatever you were doing, and they played your multiplayer game, and it was very benign, direct relationship with your customer. And from a business perspective, it sounds a bit harsh, but you owned the customer. Yeah. Yeah. Now, if you're a retailer, maybe you own the customer, maybe you don't. If you're Steam, you definitely own your customer. Yeah. And then, it was the online gaming scene was a much more benign scene, because you had a direct relationship with them. There's no middleman, hurting you all the time, taking all your money, telling you what to do. If you're, for example, an author, and you, not an author, a development team, you go to a software house and they say, we'll give you $500,000 to design that game. Well, actually, they're only lending you the money. And then they take 85% of the takings. Yep. So they're lending you your own money to finance the game that they then own. You're in a very weak position. Because you do a game online, which obviously over the last 25 or so years has become more and more of a thing.
You control the channel.
You control the channel, you control your customer, you control your product, you live and die on the quality of your relationship with your customer and the quality of your product. And that is a much... That's nice.
Fair. Yeah,
That's
it's
fine.
much fair. It's
If,
much,
you know,
yeah.
nobody's stabbing you in the back.
Yep.
You know, you stand or you succeed or fail on your own efforts.
On your own. Yeah.
And that's where we went. And then we went into web development of websites where we had a direct customer relationship. And that's just so much nicer, so much less of this always having to look round corners.
I have a final question before going to those specific ones from the audience. And my question is related to, and I think I understand it better today than yesterday. So trying to understand what is the legacy of CRL, or what is the legacy of Clem Chambers in the video game industry, because you speak a lot also about the massive multiplayer. But that's no longer CRL. It's the new company that took over.
Yeah, that was, and then they moved on.
So, what were the innovations from CRL? And I think there was the thing related to the first above 18 game.
It's really weird, right? Because the legacy. I don't like the sound of that word. It sounds like I'm nearly dead. But I mean,
you're here.
I did a lot of innovation, most of which is forgotten or wouldn't even be acknowledged. Okay,
such as
probably the first multimedia CD, because we did the first published multimedia CD for the CDTV.
Okay,
the CDTV was the first multimedia machine. We had 5 of the first 25 titles that were released, because everyone else's were late and we were the only people that had them when the machine came out. But if I said that and you went through the internet, you would find all sorts of odd people claiming to be the first multimedia CD. But I'd like to know how it was before the CDTV, which was the first machine. And I'd like to know how it was before the ones that we launched, well, Commodore launched, because we wrote it for that machine. But no, it's not in the, it's not there.
No.
And so massively multiplayer games, I put the word massively in. And Dr. Richard Bartle, who invented multiplayer games, has written that as a fact. Okay. But you'll have to dig very deep to find the fact that I put the word massively in there, because games like Doom and it was Doom were 8-player games, and there was this company called Empath and one called Heat. Was it called Heat? Came out making networks of Doom, so 8-player games, and they were spending millions pushing that out there, and we were doing multiplayer games on places like CompuServe and Genie, and they would take in our brand because we were doing multiplayer games. They're coming like, these are multiplayer games. No, they're not. That's 8 people. That's not really multiplayer games. You know, what do you talk? We do 300.
What's multi?
We do 300. So I thought, right, I'll put the word massively in the next press release, put the word massively multiplayer games in there, and all the people that were doing the more than 8-player games went, oh yeah, right, okay, we're massively multiplayer games too. But again, you have to dig deep for that, and there's a lot of things that, well, like Pete Wheelhouse told me, well, of course, you're the first people that did multiplayer games on home computers.
Because Formula 1 was one of those.
I wasn't thinking that. Formula 1 was. And someone came over here and said, you did the first lorry game. Juggernaut was the first ever lorry game ever on home computers. I didn't even know that. So when you're in early, you automatically would do lots of first. We had the first film certificate for a computer game ever.
Okay.
That was me. I did that. It was me. I did it. And because they changed the law for videos, and there was a little line at the bottom that said, if you're doing computer games and you think your game might be a bit naughty, you can apply to the BBFC for a film certificate. So I went, this could be my lucky day. I'm going to be the first one. They're going to queue up down the street to get a computer game with a film certificate on it. Oh my God, it's 15 certificate. I must buy that. So I did that, and I was right. They queued down the street, and then we did the first 18 certificate game and blah, blah, blah. But we were doing lots of stuff like that. Lots and lots of stuff like that. And then people come along and say, no, I did that first. Oh, it was me, I did it. I've got more money than you to do press releases.
And then it's up to the historians to go after and chase that. You know, you're in a country that is completely crazy about world records, Guinness records, and things like that. So it's normal that people always are thinking, okay, what was the first one of this type or that type or whatever.
Well,
so it's kind of cultural also.
When the web came out, when the internet became a thing, I've been doing online stuff for many years, since about 89. People like CompuNet and all those guys that were pre-internet. And all these people came out with, with all these claims that they did this first, they did this, and they had all this money from .com thing, and they would just, throwing this noise into the pipeline. And actually, that is how history gets made. It gets made by people that get the press releases in the right place, and they will be known as being the first of it. When somebody else beforehand, you can see that with steam engines and all sorts of inventions, bicycles and cars. There were quite a few people beforehand that did what looked like it. And but anyway, say it's up to historians to work that out when it is a legacy.
Let's hope that's very long from now. So
I've got an advantage, by the way.
What?
Because I was so young when I started. All the people that were starting the computer game industry in the UK, they were all 35. I was 19. So they'll be gone 16 years before I'm going. So I've got 16 clear years to rewrite history, and I'll be rewriting it.
Okay, sounds like a plan.
It is a good one.
So we do have a couple of questions now, entering into specific questions, some from the audience, some that we gathered before from the Portuguese community. I'm not sure if there were some from abroad. George was the one gathering this. But the first question is from Andrea, that is sitting there. And, Andrea is crazy about the thing we call the MIAs, missing in action, which are the games that were not preserved somehow. So going back to CRL, the fact is, you told us you did this advertisement, you had people sending their games. Is that still anywhere to be found that could be preserved?
I've still got the full archive of everything.
You have a full archive of those?
I don't, but they exist, yeah.
Okay, so honestly, we would be very happy to try to preserve it digitally. Not asking for more than that, but think about that.
Let me tell you. Okay, so Sotheby's just are holding digital art auctions, and this stuff is going for $500,000.
Okay,
I'm waiting for the call. I'm waiting for the call. I mean, it is something that we would actually hand over at some point. But it's like, people do come along and say, we'll license that off you. We got 2 or 3 license deals on various products over the last few years. We get royalties from emulators on the Spectrum software.
Okay.
And we did actually, because we didn't go horribly bust and down in flames like most people, we have actually got stuff like the video footage from the Rocky Horror Show when we did a Jaguar game of it. Okay. That still does exist somewhere collecting dust. So when you wanted a poster for Formula One, we had the inlay. There it was. So we have a archive, and it's pretty much all in place. I mean, it's amazing. When we actually moved one of our office many years ago, we had about a ton of inlay cards that all had to get thrown out, and literally the poor sod that had to carry it all down the stairs. And I think he gave himself a hernia doing it. We had so much of this stuff, and we used to have like rooms full of an archive. We used to keep drawers of like 20 copies of every game we ever did, but we did like 300 games.
Yes.
So sometimes it gets to be a lot of stuff, and then when you move through offices and you get smaller offices and whatever, it does get lost. But we do still have quite a bit. We
were even addressing you about things that were not published, so things that probably applied as a potential game that you decide not to launch.
I tell you, there was not many of them.
Okay.
If it crawled, we would give it a go. I mean, if it was not up to being published, it was not up to being published. If it was nearly up to being published, we would probably publish it. Yeah. Okay. If it was great, we'd publish it. If it was okay, it was published. If it was questionable whether somebody would like it or not, we would publish it. Yeah. So very, 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 very few games wouldn't we publish, because we just felt that if you put it out there and it catches the imagination, you don't really know. It's just, is it tasty enough? Is it okay? If it's like I don't want to say the word McDonald's because they'll probably sue me for saying what I say next, but like a McDonald's, it's okay, isn't it? Yeah. And if it was okay, we will publish it. And sometimes it will be a good success.
No.
And other times,
so you couldn't predict it. So in case of doubt, you publish and see how it goes.
Yeah, it would cost us maybe £1,000 to release it, and maybe we'd get 5,000, so we'd be 4,000 better off.
Okay, very well. So now going specifically about the Rocky Horror Show, many questions were made about this one to us. I have to confess I'm not a specialist in the game, but the questions I have here are, how long did it take to create Rocky Horror Show from concept to shelves, if you have any idea? Was it created with you, or was it something delivered to CRL?
No, it's all in-house. We did it all in-house.
So how long did it take, if you can...
It's about 9 months, I think.
9 months?
About 9 months. And it was one of those... So what used to happen was, with these games, you would get into a zone that we call Death March, where you had to meet a deadline, and that deadline was so hard, or at least in our minds, that you would stay awake 18 hours a day on it. Yep. And, I remember the programmer on it falling asleep on his keyboard, and us waking him up in 4-hour shifts. And he would be, drinking Coca-Cola and taking Pro Plus caffeine tablets, because we were innocent in those days. And he would literally be falling asleep. And this is a young person. You old people nod off all the time, but we were on this death march for a good 6 weeks to get this thing out. And it was a question of getting rid of those little bugs.
Okay, and why? So one of the questions was why why did you choose to develop a game based on a kind of bizarre theater play that I'm translating it in live, but
we did the War of the Worlds game, and that was based on a musician's double album that was a huge hit in the late 70s, based around H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, and the musician in question had a reputation for being very, very challenging to work with.
Okay.
And the Rocky Horror Show people had worked with him and worked with people that had worked with him. And they went, anybody that can work with that guy and get a game out, we got to work with them, because he's got to be good at working with people at all. Yeah. And so literally they approached us and they said, we're from the Rocky Horror Show. You did War of the Worlds, and that's amazing. You got that out, because that guy's album, the next album, took him a decade to get out. Okay. So the idea that we could get a game out within a certain amount of time, that was the challenge. That was impressive to them, and they came and offered it to us, and we were the sort of people that never said no.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we said yes. And people said, do you realise what you've signed up? I said, well, no, it's a musical, right? There's some guy with a wig on in fishnets. So, and he said, well, I think you better go see it. And in fact, it was Jez Sands, who was Argonaut, and Fu Katan, who became Bits. And they said, why don't you come to the Rocky Horror Show? You'll see what you got yourself into. And I think maybe even Anita Sinclair, who was attached to Clive Sinclair, but not by DNA. And we all went out to the Rocky Horror Show, and I looked at it and I thought, yeah, that's weird. And so, it wasn't, I was completely blasé about that at the time, and remain blasé about it. And I know most people are, even today in our world, where gender is a lot more fluid than it was back then, even today people are shocked by it, and not horror, but just it's a real blow to people's imaginations to see that. And we did a game, and it had a very strong following, and it's a really nice game, and it has a great brand. It's the longest running. You see, at the time, we thought, this film is the longest running film in film history in the cinema. This was in 1985. Okay. And it's still been in the cinema ever since. So another 40 years later, it's still in the cinema. Okay. So it's one of the absolute great classics of entertainment in any format. And it carries a similar sort of punch today as it did then. And great music, great story, and it made a pretty good computer game too.
Nice. There was one additional question, but it's probably more technical. I'll make it, and if we have something to comment, very well. If not, no problem. Which is, why did you leave in the initial screen of the game a screen that says enter at your own risk, where there's a lightning bolt in the mansion in a storm? Because technically speaking, it should probably occupy a lot of memory. Now, I know you're not the technical guy, but I also know you sometimes gave ideas and tried to improve the thing. So do you remember anything specific?
It wasn't my idea, but there was an overall... we kind of rarely did it like this, but this actually had a bit of a game design behind it before it was done. And the idea was it would be enter at your own risque.
Okay.
Risque being, you know, a little bit sexually naughty.
Yeah.
So that was the idea. So it was to be in line with the idea of haunted house.
Okay.
And it was to be, I mean, over time, computer games got much, much more about story than about game. And it got much, much more about the story rather than the technology. I mean, 10 or 15 years later, you get these games that aren't even games anymore.
Yep.
People think of games, but you just waggle your joystick until you get to the next part of the story. Yeah. So there was a bit more of a story element. Okay. So when you look at, I don't know, Chucky Egg, it's Kong. There's no story there. There's a little bit of symbolism, perhaps. Yep. But this was much more towards having a story, and therefore it
made sense to create the scenario, the context.
It probably just loaded in and did it, and then kicked it out of memory anyway. But I mean, I don't know. I can't
if you needed the memory, you would
take it back.
That.
Take it
back. So I wonder if there's any additional question anyone wants to make. If not, there's
a noisy wife down there.
There's what?
A noisy wife.
A noisy wife? Andrea, do you have any other question? No. We'll obviously edit this later. So I think, Clem, thank you for coming.
That's my pleasure. Well, I mean, I have to thank you because this is a bit like, you know, beaming down into the Rocky Horror Show in a way. I mean, it's like...
But in a nice way.
Well, I was in Rocky Horror Show too, I guess. But it's just surprising and amazing and very pleasing. And I know Pete is very moved that something that he did so long ago actually has a legacy. This is a legacy of an era. You know, I did 300 games, so I mean, maybe it's just the proof of concept of shit against the wall, as they would say in the old days, and see what sticks. This game stuck. And it stuck because of what they had in their minds. Because I remember them coming around and saying, going to do this, going to do that. And I thought, oh, okay. Yeah, let's do that. Formula One, racing car, you know, I can't go really wrong on it. And George was very, very, very keen on it. And Pete was very keen on it. And I was keen on the fact they were keen on it. Because I'm a great believer if people are passionate.
People believe that, I understand.
Run with their passion, you know, you can help them with it. And
nurture it and
it will come through. Exactly. Nurture it. It will come through in the product. I don't have to like it for it to be good. And, you know, I've written a load of books available on Amazon. And you know, what I don't like is the sort of editor that wants you to write his book or her book and then wants you to say, oh, no, wants to write it via remote control. Yeah. Okay. You know, I'm not that sort of person. If they believed in it and wanted to do it and had their ideas, I will help be the midwife of that thing. And Formula One is one of the, well, obviously we're sat here, but it had elements, not intuitive elements. It had vision that I don't think anybody at the time was anywhere close to. And they produced that. And here we are, 40 years later, with an audience that play it fanatically today. And, you know, that is the computer game industry of that time has a legacy. Yep. And it's a very complicated story of a lot of people trying desperately to build their own personal businesses and getting into a lot of financial trouble. A lot of people went bust horribly trying to, building that game. I mean, Sinclair went down how many times? He was absolutely pilloried at the time. Everyone, you know, it's the British disease to kick people who are trying. Yeah. And they were just kicking him all the time in the media. Oh, kick. And, he had his people that said he was great and he was making front pages and he got made sir. But the overall tone of it was always trying to pull him down, always trying to pull that innovation, that thing that would take you to the next level, try to pull that down.
Pull it down, yeah.
And you know, a lot of people struggled to bring about what then turned into where we are today. And that's something that is the true legacy of that period.
Very well. Thank you so much, Clem. It was a huge pleasure to have you here, and we'll remain in touch.
It's great to be
sure.
here. I'll wake up and it'll all be a dream soon. Don't worry.
Thank you.